In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a great conversation with Jennifer Sanders, the co-founder and executive director at the Dallas Innovation Alliance, or the DIA, as she refers to it a lot in this episode. Jennifer tells us about the DIA and how it came to be, and the needs-based, neighbourhood-centric approach that they take. We cover the importance of educating and empowering citizens, especially young people and people from underserved neighbourhoods, on how they can engage with their communities, and Jennifer shares a great story about the benefits of giving kids a seat at the table when discussing solutions to community problems. We discuss how Dallas is embracing the smart city concept and the real impacts and benefits of the openness, transparency, and knowledge sharing that goes on between individuals and organizations in the smart city space. Jennifer tells us about the project she's working on at the DIA, including their focus on equity, digital inclusion, and having a regional focus through the North Texas Innovation Alliance. We have a great chat about how the regional approach is the natural next step from the city-centric focus and how it helps with efficiencies and economies of scale for smaller towns with fewer resources. Now, the DIA has dozens of partner organizations from all sectors, and Jennifer tells us about how they approach integration and collaboration with so many stakeholders. We finish our chat talking about the emerging trends of data privacy and ownership of public data-driven projects. And we also have an interesting chat about telemedicine too. This episode was recorded before COVID-19 brought travel restrictions and lockdowns to the world. And so it will be very interesting to see what innovations in this space happen once we get through this crisis. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am super. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, I'm so grateful for having me.
Well, let's jump straight in. And can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
Absolutely. So my background is actually in consulting around strategic communications and financial relations and kind of all those pieces, and had been in that sector for quite a while until I noticed that all of my clients in technology and energy and economic development were all starting to converge around this crazy thing called smart cities about 6 years ago. And that just fascinated me to the point where I created an organization with the co-founder, Trey Bowles, called the Dallas Innovation Alliance. And now I get to work on creating smart communities for my day job. And it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. How long ago did you start the Alliance?
So we were founded in 2015. We were actually able to launch at the White House in September 2015 as part of President Obama's Smart Cities Initiative, where he announced that huge Department of Transportation grant that Columbus, Ohio is executing right now.
Yeah. I just visited Columbus.
Oh, very good. What'd you think?
Yeah, they're doing great stuff, and it'll be really interesting to see Columbus 2.0 or Smart Columbus 2.0, and we're heading with that. One thing that really I loved is just the feel of the collaboration there, which sounds weird, but just to be able to sit around the table and have all the different, the public, private, but different levels of public and private sectors all, and the research piece as well, all kind of talking to each other, and not even talking is the first step, but actually integrating the projects together was really special, I think. And I really enjoyed it. And I visited some of the projects they're working on as well. And I really like that they've taken an approach that's helping people at a neighborhood level. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not this flash high tech thing. I mean, it's high tech. There's definitely super awesome technology happening, but it's actually about what does the region actually need, which I loved.
Oh, it's so important to, and first of all, I grew up in the Midwest, so I completely know that feel that you got in Columbus. I'm a Midwesterner at heart, so I always love that part of the country. But I think you're absolutely right in the sense of you have to, at least from the perspective the DIA took, we knew it was going to be a neighborhood-centric approach because I think every city, and particularly a city the size of Dallas, there are so many different parts of the city that have wildly different needs. There's some through lines, obviously, but you really have to look at what do the residents in that area need? What does the infrastructure look like? What does the population look like? What does proximity look like to amenities and other kind of core services? And how do you find unique and innovative ways to serve those constituents within the context of stitching together the whole of a city or of a region?
Okay, well, tell us, I think you already started to tell us this a little bit, but what really sparked your interest in this? The term I use now is smart community because I think it's the next level of smart city. But in this space, what really sparked your interest?
I think so. When I was in school, I was a total social science person. I know that you are an engineer. I'm not. That is not my part of the brain. But when I think about the psychology of people and of communities, and then the economic side of how do you make things work, operationally and financially, pulling those together, is something that's always fascinated me. But I think the advent of smart cities and really how do we look at things sustainably and then use new tools at our disposal that weren't 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that would be data and Internet of Things. When those all converge, it just got me so excited that these old problems that had been entrenched for so long, now there were new tools and new ways of looking at the problems to really try and transform people's lives.
And that really leads to this next question. You've already started to answer it, but from your perspective, what is a smart city?
So we knew, when we started the DIA, we knew that if you asked 20 organizations or 20 cities what a smart city was, you'd get either blank looks or you'd get 20 different answers, one of the two or a combination. And so we knew we had to come up with somewhat of our North Star definition of what a smart city was. And what we came up with was pretty holistic compared to some, in the sense of, a smart city really looks at that intersection point between community, data, and technology to improve quality of life, inclusive economic development, and resource efficiency.
And do you see the term smart community as something different or kind of already feeding into your definition of what a smart city actually is?
I think it's part of it because I think a smart community is a building block that creates a smart city. I think if you don't have a smart community, you'll never reach that level of kind of all the stakeholders together.
No, that's really cool because, the reason I reached out to you on LinkedIn is because I read one of your articles and I really felt that we had a lot of synergies on, our definitions and then what we actually want to do in this space, which is, at the heart of it, it's help the community or I guess change the way that we do things for the betterment of the community.
Absolutely.
I guess that also is like why this is important, but is there any other key factors that you think about a lot about why this, smart concept is so important to be moving into the future?
Oh gosh, I think we're at such a crossroads, and I think, we could look, for me, I could look locally and look at the state level in the US, but I think globally we're at such a crossroads. One being the standpoint of extreme weather events and climate change and what that's doing and what we need to be prepared for. I think in Dallas specifically, we have so many people moving to Dallas. I think about 360 people a day move into this region. And so when we think about financial constraints, aging, infrastructure, all of these new people, where are we going to put them and how are we going to keep them safe? There's just this critical crossroads and collision that's going to, necessitate new ways of thinking. And then I think compounding that, when I think I'm constantly thinking about the social issues and constructs around economic inequality and how certain neighborhoods, we were talking about the neighborhood level, how do you empower those communities that have been underserved and under-resourced, and how do you make sure that they come along with this economic growth and these investments? So how are we empowering all communities while preparing for the future?
I think that's so important, and I love the word empowerment. As much as it gets thrown around a lot, but what it actually means is, people can feel like they have a stake, well, not even a stake, that they can influence decision making in a positive sense, that they actually as a citizen or, as a member of the community, they have a say in how their city or town or region is actually operating.
Absolutely. We hear a lot, or I've certainly heard a lot about having a seat at the table is a phrase that I hear a lot. And so it's about how do you advocate for yourself and your community, but do you know how to get into the rooms where your voice is heard, and how are you part of the decision-making process? And I think that's been really, really gratifying. There's programs, for example, and this is, I think a lot also about where's the cross section between the analog and the digital in terms of how we're empowering communities. And in some cases, there's a group that I was involved in that worked with high school students. And really one of the things we taught them was, here's how you can make a difference in your community, and here's how you find the right person to talk to and attend city council meetings, and you have every much of a right to speak as the adults in the room. And so you really are starting to teach, the next generation on how they can be engaged and how they can really, again, feel empowered to speak about what they would like to see and then go make it happen.
And that's so important too. It's something I've been thinking about as well, that having young people at the table, and not young as in, just sub 30 or, 30 or 25 to 40 or whatever, but which is still important key players, but then the very young and children, and getting them to understand how they do get, that seat at the table, exactly what you said. I was just going to reiterate that, but you've already said it perfectly. I think it's so key in this space because we need those voices to be active at a young age, so then when the time, that they become leaders, they'll be well equipped to serve and to make a difference in the world.
I totally agree. And I would, go expand on that and just say, bring kids into the room when you're looking for solutions. Because the ideas that a 10-year-old, a 5 to 10-year-old has, they see things so differently, as we know, but some of the ideas that I've heard from them have been some of the most brilliant and are ones that certainly the adults in the room would never have considered. And so I love the idea of bringing kids into advisory committees or hackathon type events where you're creating civic solutions, because I think all the adults would be surprised.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's so much in that we can really harness and leverage. And I think we're not doing that enough in this space. And I think the smart community space needs to emphasize and bring in that focus.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about the US, and you can drill down to Dallas specifically, but I'm really keen to hear how you think that the US or Dallas is embracing, this smart community concept.
I think the US I think they very much are. There's a lot of conversation around it. And, even in the so if I think about 2015 and when we started, there were very few cities that were really understood the direction they wanted to go, and active piloting and really trying to wrap their arms around what will this take and what does this mean for my city. And I think 5 years later, there's a much better understanding of the space. But I think now the conversations are, one, how do we make sure smaller and mid-sized cities have the same resources or understanding? And resources often comes down to human resources as much as capital to bring them along on the journey. But the second piece is really how to scale. And I think that's a challenge that probably everywhere in the world has, is, okay, we know what we need, we know what we want, we know what we think works. Now how do we scale it? How do we pay for it? How do we develop the policy changes necessary to implement? So I think now the concept has anchored and the conversations are more and more prevalent, and they are more and more human and community centric, which is wonderful. It's not the shiny object as much as it may have been in years past, but we're still looking at how do you get it done with limited resources is, I think, where everyone's trying to find the silver bullet, or one of them.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the conversation's maturing a lot in the sense of we probably don't really still understand what exactly it is, because I don't think it is exactly anything, because it morphs and changes. And like you said, it's becoming more citizen-centric, which is awesome. And not just at a strategic level or like written in a document that we need to focus on the community, but actually, I'm seeing that co-creation, which again is a buzzword, but actually bringing the community along for the journey is really important. And I've just spent some time in the US, and it is really, I guess, hopeful, or not hopeful.
Encouraged.
Encouraged, yes, thank you. Encouraged because there's lots happening. And from Australia, US perspective, we can learn so much from each other because there's brilliant pockets of innovation and, things happening in Australia as well. And we do actually suffer from a lot of the same problems, which is the tyranny of distance, or the opportunity of distance, I've been calling it, and that regional and rural aspect as well. Because I think, there's more drive to decrease the digital divide and the rural divide as well. Yeah, and that regional approach, I suppose, is that something that you're focusing on as well? Like, obviously you're in Dallas, but what does that mean for the neighbourhoods or the suburbs or the region that you also are within?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. So this year we've launched a regional initiative called the North Texas Innovation Alliance, and really I think a regional approach is a natural next step from a city-centric one. And it really comes down to the fact that their jurisdictional lines and geographic lines are a bit moot at this point. And in Dallas-Fort Worth, more than 30% of our residents cross a county line every single day. And so the way to think about it is, I don't care that I've crossed a county line as a citizen. I want the emergency services to work. I want the traffic signals to work. The services and the safety and the care that I receive, I just want it to work. And so when we think about how do we coordinate as a region, both operationally and strategically, I think that that's just something that needs to happen. And I think that there's a great hunger for that to happen. I think there's economies of scale and policy implications beyond that. So regional is just so critical at this point.
And I think what you just touched on there is also important to keep in the conversation. It's not just about kind of a higher level community benefit for regional. It's actually that scalability and the efficiencies in being able to make one policy rather than each, having their own or whatever. And obviously each region and each town is different, but having a standard approach to systems makes sense. Whereas you have a base level, which we can all operate on under, and then the initiatives that are, smart city or smart community initiatives, they're the things that will be unique for each, region based on their pain points. But we first need to kind of agree that we want to have a standard to work from, because doing it all bespoke is no longer going to cut it anymore, I think. And going back to what you said earlier about, having enough resources, it makes so much sense to, be leveraging from the resources that we already have that want to do this stuff. So yeah, I think it's so important, and something we haven't really caught on to yet in Australia. There's definitely some talk and some action in things that are happening around Australia, but I think that should be really where our focus is, in that regional approach, because otherwise, we're just going to keep reinventing the wheel, I guess, which is not useful for anyone, and overwhelm. It's so overwhelming to think that you have to do absolutely everything yourself.
Well, you really get into analysis paralysis, right? And so I think that, the digital divide is a perfect example of that. I think that it's such a massive issue, and the statistics are just so sad and so depressing. And I feel like I read report after report or go to forum after forum, and you listen to this, and then it's time to go home. And so I think everyone is so overwhelmed by the scale that you don't know where to start, and everyone is just looking for someone to take the lead. And that's where I think this whole smart cities, smart communities, smart regions movement is so impactful, because everyone is willing to share with each other. And to your point, how do we learn from each other and not make the same mistakes, and learn from best practices and apply what works, so we can all move faster. And I know I often say that this is the first industry I've ever worked in where people are this willing to share what went well, but also what didn't. I think that level of candor and authenticity is really prevalent in this space right now. And that's something that has been so heartening to me and has continued to have me so energized about being in this space.
Well, I'm really glad that you've, experienced that, because it's something I talk about a lot that we need more of. Transparency is one word, but just particularly from a government to government level, actually sharing those stories. As a board member of, not-for-profit Australian Smart Communities Association, that's what the members are really craving, which is something that I think you were talking about as well, is that sharing of knowledge and what worked, but also what didn't work, no matter what the outcome was. But the process is also so important, because some people are trying to work out all those things. They've never done it before. They might not even have the right skill sets or know how to get those skill sets. So if we can share those things and make it just a little bit less complex, we can actually move forward in this space.
Absolutely. Well, and I think to your point about the regional approach, something that we're seeing is there's very, very small, 5,000 person towns in North Texas. There's 1.5 million person towns and cities. And the small cities have no idea where to start, and they're very overwhelmed, and they keep hearing this term and they're asked to do it. And they don't have a chief information officer, let alone a chief innovation officer. And I think this regional approach, even the first convenings that we've had, the smaller towns have been able to sit and listen and learn from the large cities. And so you can really lift everyone together as you climb and as we all tend to expand. And so if you can find ways not only to educate and empower the smaller towns, but also give them the economies of scale. So we haven't even started talking about procurement and purchasing yet, which could be a whole nother podcast. But if you can bring the small towns in on these larger projects, then they're able to do more with less resources, because they're both learning from and implementing alongside their neighbors. And so I think there's a powerful way to elevate that whole region, large and small, which also extends, I think, into rural communities.
No, that's brilliant, and really great point too. It's not just about learning, but it's actually for regional areas, obviously learning, but then they can implement alongside. So we're learning as we're going, but we're sharing as well. Like, it's not just us trying to do it as an individual, making the most use of those resources. It's so key, so key. I want to talk about you. Tell me about the projects and things that you're currently working on.
No, absolutely. 2020 is going to be a big year. So the Dallas Innovation Alliance, our first phase was doing a living lab concept in our urban core. And so we had 10 integrated projects in this compressed 6-block environment to really understand how these projects behaved, independently, but also how that data could be used cross-project to get the maximum benefit of that data. So that was our first set of projects. And then what we're currently deploying is, we're calling it phase 2, but it's completely focused on use cases related to equity in an underserved area of Dallas, which is Southern Dallas. And just for context, Southern Dallas is the size of the city of Atlanta, but makes up 17% of the tax base of Dallas. And so there's a great divide. It's much less dense, and has different challenges than an urban city center would. So we're testing solutions related to mobility, digital inclusion, and public safety in that sector. So all of those projects will be deployed in 2020. So that's one set of things we're working on, which I'm so excited about. And then the regional alliance is the second big piece. And then digital inclusion in a broader sense, in bringing stakeholders together in a digital inclusion alliance, is something we've been helping convene those partners alongside the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. So that's in a nascent phase right now, but just trying to get everyone to pick where they can be of highest and best use given the type of organization they have, and really come together around a cohesive strategy that's fully aligned and collaborative to make the best use of all of the incredible people and organizations we have in Dallas.
Yeah, wow. Sounds like you're going to be super busy in 2020.
I'm so excited about all of it.
It's going to be awesome. And my next question is normally about integration, but I actually want to talk more about the projects that you're planning from that integration sense, I suppose. Like, how many different partners, say for the neighborhood project, like how many different partners do you have, and how did you actually go about bringing all those people together?
So the organization, in a broader sense, we have about 36 partner organizations at the DIA, and that's everyone from obviously the city and the county to the Chamber of Commerce and the Regional Transit Authority. We work with the private sector, but we make it a point to work with both the Fortune 500 companies as well as startups locally, because we want to make sure that those local companies have the opportunity to test and commercialize and work together alongside those major companies to learn from them and have potential partnerships. And then we work with a lot of civic organizations and academic institutions. So we really try and have everyone in the room to find where are those commonalities aligned under this North Star mission of the DIA. And we hear a lot about how did you get everybody in a room? And it really was that everyone has a passion for Dallas and everyone wanted to see the city better and see this opportunity continue to grow. And so getting everyone in the room wasn't hard. Getting everyone to understand what we were talking about at the inset with the smart cities thing was an education piece at the beginning. And then it was really about figuring out what part everyone wanted to play. And we were actually very lucky in that with that North Star, everyone wanted to participate. So for phase two, I guess for these projects, we've worked with about 80 different community organizations within the neighborhoods we're operating in. We are currently working with, I think, 10 different private sector partners to do these 4 main projects in the southern sector.
And is that how they're funded, through kind of private sector, government? How does that work?
Sure. So it's really it's kind of a classic P3 model from the standpoint of we operate with primarily foundation grants and private sector support, both in kind and financial. So that's the primary method we get the projects done, and also how the organization operates. That's
awesome. Yeah, it's interesting that it wasn't hard to get people to the table. And I guess I want to pick up something that you said earlier, which is people are looking for someone to take the lead, right? And that's what you guys were doing, or you were doing. And so there is this kind of craving to, like you said, people love Dallas, they want it to be better. There is this craving for that, but it's that the hard part is, somebody to take the lead and really get their hands dirty and implement this stuff and test and try it and fail and move to the next thing and really give it their all. So I think, great job on what you're doing in this space. I'm really,
thank you.
Yeah, just excited to talk to you and I guess continue to follow on and see the implementation and all those type of things.
Perfect. No, we look forward to it.
Oh, cool. Okay. Let's move to the future and talk about emerging trends. So what are the emerging trends in your mind that people aren't talking about enough?
Oh my. I think that most of the things that I would mention, and I guess will mention, are being talked about, but I think that there's still so much to figure out that I'm hoping we're talking more about it. And so one of those will be the data privacy piece and data ownership, and how we're making commitments to citizens when in public data driven projects. And what I mean by that is when I see some cities undertaking deployments where there's a whole lot of pushback around the data collection piece of smart city projects, think about how to best identify a citizen data bill of rights, for example. So how do you get to the community and educate the community early so they can understand, why are we doing this? How is it going to benefit me? How are we protecting this data? And what will we never use that data for? So I think really outlining and making commitments to citizens when they can't opt out of some of these projects is so important. So that speaks again to transparency and protection. So it wraps all of those things up together. But I think, I just don't think that there's a blueprint yet for that. But I think the more these projects are deployed, the more critical it's going to be. And I think we'll see a lot of lessons learned, both positively and negatively, as all of that is figured out.
Yeah, I agree.
And then I think the healthcare and social services space is an area that I'm really excited to follow, in the next year or two. And that's everything from telemedicine, but also how can we provide better mental health care and substance abuse and homelessness treatment and resources via Internet of Things and AI and these new technology-driven solutions. well focused on the person. So I think there's just a lot to be gained. And certainly some of the things I saw at CES this year get me really excited. But I think the healthcare space is going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's lots happening in that space and we don't talk about it as much. Well, definitely the circles that I'm in, it's not health and wellness is I've been seeking out people to talk to and like that engagement piece. And I have actually had someone on the podcast talking specifically about the next generation of hospitals and care and that type of thing. And there is so much in that, yeah, you could, again, do a whole series of podcasts on just the innovations happening in that space.
And some of it, I think, is just putting a twist on what we already have. So when we think about the repurposing of resources, so I think that in the U.S., the public library system is such an important place of community gathering and is always looking to reinvent itself. And so something that we've been thinking about is how do you turn potentially one of the small meeting rooms at libraries into a telemedicine office. So if you could walk in and apply for jobs and check out books and get your preventative health all in the same space, particularly if you're someone that is transit dependent or just has a difficult time accessing medical care, wouldn't that be a great way to repurpose space and leverage the connectivity that already goes into those buildings and whatnot? So in addition to kind of the evolving services, how do we make our existing infrastructure smarter? And I think the integration of that is something that really excites me.
Yeah, me too. I think there's not enough kind of emphasis on utilizing our assets, the assets that we already have in a better way. And that is a smart city project, right? Or smart community project, because we can not only offer a different service or a new service or, even just move the service to be more accessible for people, but then we're actually utilizing these assets that we have invested millions, billions of dollars into. And I don't think, I agree. I don't think that's been kind of talked about enough, but it is an emerging trend, which I love following and I love to see, particularly for, I think, rural and regional areas where we talk a lot about, not having enough resources, but what resource do we have already that we can rejig or revamp or even transform into being something that can better the community?
100%. And with the advent of telemedicine, I'm actually rereading Susan Crawford's book, Fiber, right now. I'm not sure if you've read that. It's a pretty incredible resource on, obviously the nature and critical importance of fiber, but really comparing it, in this case, comparing the U.S. to countries around the world, but also equating it with the electrification in the 1920s and how that spread similar to fiber in the sense that rural America was kind of the last to be electrified and have the lights turned on, literally. And so, but when you look at the connectivity infrastructure and how important that'll be for rural America to gain these resources as well. Telemedicine, if there's no local doctor, will only work if there's also high speed internet, right? So there's a very circular nature to how we solve problems in that area.
Well, it's been so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
This won't be our last conversation, I'm sure.
Absolutely not. Call me anytime.
And I just have one last question for you. How can people connect with you?
I think the easiest way is either on LinkedIn or Twitter. And on LinkedIn, you can look me up at Jennifer Sanders. And on Twitter, Dallas Smart City is the DIA's handle. And that's the best way to find me.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on to the podcast. And I definitely look forward to our next conversation and see what we can do together. I feel a collaboration brewing for sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jennifer. And we'll talk soon.
Perfect. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcasts. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.